This NBA offseason makes absolutely no sense. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to All 30, your favorite spot for NBA content. Today, I want to go over all of the NBA trades and moves that have happened this offseason and why most of them make no sense at all. I don't understand why half of these teams have made the moves they made, and I want to talk about those. If you're new, please hit that subscribe button. I appreciate those of you watching this video. Make sure to like it, comment your thoughts on the NBA free agency as a whole in this offseason and what you think of some of the biggest moves that we're going to talk about today. So first things first, this offseason, obviously the move that everyone was waiting on and the move that kind of was the first domino to fall, so to say, this offseason was Giannis Antetokounmpo being traded from the Milwaukee Bucks to the Miami Heat. Now, this trade is one that a lot of people saw coming, but somehow I was still shocked that it actually happened. You know, over the years, Miami has tried to go after a handful of stars, whether it be Damian Lillard in the 2023 offseason or Donovan Mitchell or, you know, whoever it may be, but finally they land their star in Giannis Antetokounmpo for the quote-unquote Dame package that the Miami Heat have kind of been dangling around in front of whatever star team they were trying to trade from. Miami obviously had the trade package of Tyler Hero and Jaime Jaquez and, you know, a handful of other picks. For a while, it was Jovic was involved in the trades before Kelly Oubre was obviously drafted the following season in 2024. And now, of course, they have Kasparis Jakučonis, who they were able to include in the trade for Giannis and kind of sweeten the deal with him, which I think was a good pickup for Milwaukee. But this trade, on its surface, makes no sense to me. The Milwaukee Bucks and the Miami Heat essentially swapped like where they were in the standings, right? Miami is now a team who has Giannis and they have Bam, and that's kind of it. Other than that, they have such shallow depth, and with Giannis's recent kind of injury history, I just don't see them being that good of a team next year. Of course, if you have Giannis, you're always going to be in a position to play really well, make it to the playoffs, and maybe go on a run. But when you're giving up so much depth and you're giving up your entire young core, Tyler Hero, not a very desirable player around the league. Obviously, his archetype of a combo guard isn't very desired among the league, but there's a lot of players like him you can find. Kasparis Jakučonis, he could become a good player one day. Jaime Jaquez Jr. has obviously shown that he could be sixth man of the year and be a solid bench player, maybe your best bench player on a contending team. Norman Powell wasn't involved in this trade, but the Heat lost Norm in free agency to the Bulls, which maybe we'll talk about later. And then the Heat have Kelly Oubre, who I like Kelly Oubre. He's a very intriguing big man who I think still has a lot of time to grow. I liked him a lot in the draft, and I think he could be really well for the Bucks. But giving up all of that for Giannis is just very risky, especially when you're going to have to give Giannis that max extension sometime in the next year. It just seems like a lot in a big risk for Miami. But of course, you know, Pat Riley got to go after it, got to make the big move. And so I might respect it, but it's just confusing. And now the Milwaukee Bucks are kind of in the same spot, right? They have all those players I just mentioned, and that's kind of it. And what? They have Gary Trent Jr., who they just signed for arguably the worst contract in the league, along with Kyle Kuzma. Like, I don't really get what the Bucks or the Heat are doing. This trade as a whole had to happen, but I think that Giannis being traded to Boston for Jaylen Brown would have been the better move for everyone involved, which kind of takes me to the next move, the Jaylen Brown trade. Like, what on earth are we doing here, man? The Boston Celtics, of course, trade Jaylen Brown for Paul George and a couple first-round picks, maybe a couple first-round picks. It might just end up being a first-round swap in a couple seconds, I believe. Like, what kind of move is that? You see the kind of trade offers that were on the table, even reports from a team like Portland who was willing to offer Shaedon Sharpe, Scoot Henderson, Jeremy Grant, and a couple other moves before they went and traded for Ja Morant. There was a good move on the table with, you know, who knows, but likely 3 or 4 first-round picks for Jaylen Brown, but instead they traded for a injury-riddled Paul George. And to me, it just doesn't make any sense. Trading Jaylen Brown for that low of value, there was no reason for them to make the trade a couple weeks ago when they did. They could have sat on that deal, and they could have made that deal at the end of the offseason. You don't think the Sixers would have made Paul George and a couple first-round picks for Jaylen Brown? You don't think they would have done that in August, at the end of August? Like, this trade is one that I don't understand why Boston did it, frankly. I know there's been rumors going around that they just couldn't bring Jaylen Brown back, and maybe they were scared they wouldn't get a better offer for him. But, maybe they see this as an opportunity to still be competing, right? Maybe they think Paul George will be able to help them more in the now versus a young player who won't be able to help them for a couple years, which is fair. I get that. But then why don't you make that move with Milwaukee before Giannis gets traded for Giannis? Then everyone wins. Milwaukee gets a star in Jaylen Brown who can be the number one option and help them win in the short term, which is favorable for how the new draft lottery is, along with Boston being able to get Giannis and still compete and have a amazing running mate alongside Jason Tatum. So I just don't understand it, but the Boston Celtics did it. They traded Jaylen Brown, and then they also let Nikola Vucevic walk to go back to the Magic. So I just don't see what the Celtics are doing. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And overall, I don't like the move for them. I think they would have been better off holding on to him and trying to find another move later in the offseason. But comment below your thoughts. So those are obviously the two biggest moves, but this next move is one that I also frankly just don't understand. That is the Los Angeles Lakers agreeing to a sign and trade with the Utah Jazz to acquire Walker Kessler. In this deal, the Utah Jazz received unprotected picks in 2031 and 2033, as well as first round pick swaps in 2028 and 2030. That means they have control of 4 of the next 6 picks for the Los Angeles Lakers. So the 4 first round picks is insane, right? But then on top of it, the Lakers had to sign him to a $130 million a year for 4 years. So they're paying him over $30 million per year for a player who wasn't much better than DeAndre Ayton last season. He averaged 14.4 points, 10.8 rebounds, 3 assists, and shot 70% from the field. And you compare that to a guy like Ayton, right, who averaged 12.5 points, 8 rebounds, 1 assist, and shot 67% from the field. So yeah, Walker's a better player, sure, but is it worth paying him 3 times as much for slightly better production than who they had in DeAndre Ayton? I don't know. You guys let me know in the comments. Now, some of the moves the Lakers made that I do like. They re-signed Austin Reeves, which is great. They added Quentin Grimes. They added Sandro. They added Colin Sexton. They added Kevon Looney. But some of those might not be as appealing when they lost Rui Hachimura. They lost Ayton. They lost Jackson Hayes. They lost their best shooter in Luke Kennard, and they lost Marcus Smart. So the Lakers are going to look completely different next year, and I think this Walker Kessler move was purely one to satisfy Luka Doncic. They don't want Luka being upset, and because of that, I think they went out and signed Kessler for an insane deal, but we'll see how it works for them long term. The next trade involves my favorite team, the Portland Trail Blazers. They acquired Ja Morant in exchange for Jeremy Grant and Chris Murray. For the Memphis Grizzlies, I personally don't like this move. Maybe the relationship was too far gone and the Grizzlies had to give up Ja Morant, and Jeremy Grant and Chris Murray was the best that they could have got from him, right? Rumors were that the Grizzlies would have to attach draft capital on top of Ja Morant just to get off of him. And so the fact they were able to get a somewhat decent forward in Jeremy Grant despite the contract and a somewhat intriguing former first round pick in Chris Murray is definitely better than nothing. But Ja Morant, who was a former 2-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year, Most Improved Player, averaging 27 points per game just a couple years ago, only getting Jeremy Grant essentially for him is a little bit embarrassing if you ask me. The Memphis Grizzlies now have way too many forwards, and so I don't know what the Grizzlies are going to do the rest of the offseason, but it's an interesting move for them. For the Blazers, I really do like this trade. Acquiring a former player of Ja Morant's caliber for so cheap is phenomenal. I think Ja Morant is going to have an insane breakout season for the Trailblazers, but comment below your thoughts on that. Speaking of which, the Blazers also signed Robert Williams to a 3-year deal, which is amazing. They signed him for a little bit more than I thought. He signed a 3-year, $44 million contract, which starts next season at $14 million and then moves up $500,000 each year. So in 2027, 2028, it'll be $14.5 million and then $15 million the following season, which for a guy like Robert Williams, if he can stay healthy, I think that's a phenomenal, good deal for a backup center. He complements Donovan Klingen's game really well. And so overall, I like the deal. Blazers also ended up signing Brandon Carlson to a 1-year deal and Micah Porter, which both are interesting. Micah Porter was picked up off the waivers, and I think he could be interesting for the Blazers, but nothing too big there. Now, one more move I would like to discuss from the offseason is the Toronto Raptors trading for Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard goes back to Toronto, and they ended up trading Grady Dick and Brandon Ingram to the Los Angeles Clippers in exchange for Kawhi Leonard. However, the deal is currently on hold. Per AP, the Kawhi Leonard trade to Toronto is on hold pending the outcome of the NBA's investigation into whether the Los Angeles Clippers circumvented salary cap rules, the Raptors announced on Thursday. So there is still the investigation, and so we will see if this deal ends up being final anytime soon. It obviously has not been announced by either team until they figure out all the details, but I like this trade in theory for the Raptors. I think that is going to help the Raptors become one of the best teams in the league. I should say in the East. I think they could definitely be one of the top 2 or 3 teams next year, depending on how injuries go. I do want to touch on that Jaylen Brown trade for the 76ers. The 76ers made a couple moves this offseason that I really like. I don't think getting rid of Paul George really means anything. However, the Sixers weren't without a few losses. They lost Quentin Grimes, Kelly Oubre Jr., and Andre Drummond, but they also picked up Anthony Simons, shout out Blazers legend, as well as Dean Wade, 2 players that I really liked for the Blazers, both players who can shoot the ball well and would be good off the bench. However, once the Blazers traded for John Morant, they obviously have a bazillion guards on the roster and aren't in need of a guard. And so I really do like this deal for the 76ers. I like the additions they made. Jaylen Brown, I think, is really going to put them in contender status. New York Knicks, I still think, are the favorite to come out on top in the East, but 76ers, Raptors, and maybe the Pistons, depending on what Jalen Duren does, could be right there in the mix. Oh, one more trade. Okay, I know I said 2 moves ago was going to be the last one. I have to touch on LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball is a Minnesota Timberwolf, which is crazy. It was a part of a giant 4-team trade, but essentially the Minnesota LaMelo Ball part was Minnesota got LaMelo Ball and Josh Green in exchange for Naz Reid and a couple of first-round picks. LaMelo Ball joining alongside Anthony Edwards is very interesting, to say the least. I'm excited to watch them. I think they'll be one of the most fun teams to watch next season, but I'm very interested to see how the fit goes. If LaMelo Ball can mature a little bit, play more serious, and not mess around as much like he did in a Hornets jersey, then maybe he'll be a bit better, but I think that fit is questionable at best, but I could see it being a high-risk, high-reward play. If it doesn't work out, Minnesota gave up a lot, and I'm not a big fan of that move. Hornets obviously sold high on LaMelo Ball, and so it'll be interesting to see how LaMelo Ball fits alongside Anthony Edwards. If you're a LaMelo Ball or a Timberwolves fan, comment below your thoughts on the deal. If I missed any trades, guys, make sure to comment them below. Let me know your thoughts on the offseason, some of the moves that your favorite team has made, and if you did enjoy this video, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Let's get there as soon as we can. We're only at like 50 right now, but I think we can get there soon with your guys' help. As some of you know, I have a other NBA channel where I primarily talk about the Trailblazers, but I want to grow this one as well. So comment your thoughts, and until next time, I hope you guys all have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Peace.